Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire. Youth Worker Nation, this is Doug here on Youth Worker on Fire. Got another little tip for you today, and we're going to talk about being intentional. You know, no one had really talked about being intentional, even in campus life, which was like special forces of student ministries. We talk about certain areas, and they had books divided and things, but the word intentional never came up. In fact, it may be more of a business word now, but we're in the business of helping students and families and churches, as well as communities and schools. So we've got to be intentional in everything we do. So the one thing I would suggest to you is this, that you start writing down or typing it in your phone, your iPhone or your Samsung or whatever it is, and make sure that you start writing down, what do I really want to accomplish? What do I want to intentionally make happen this day, this week? What do I want to intentionally make happen in a month? What do I want to make happen, or what do I want to see happen? You're not going to be able to make it all happen, but what do I want to see happen in 6 months, or even quarterly, which is 3 months? What do I want to see happen in a year? What do I want to see happen in 5 years, in 7 years? Now, all that, I did not want to hear that when I was younger, but guys that are in their teens even and in their 20s, whether high school and college, I've seen teenagers be goal-driven and oriented. So of all things, we need to be goal-driven so that we know where we're going, and people want to know. Now, organization was not my biggest thing, but when I became intentional about drawing out a calendar and making sure that was mailed out, snail mail, as well as social media, then I found that parents were finding a way to get their students there because they knew there was a plan. I found that if I projected 6 months, a year, 2 years out when trips are going to happen, I found that more people signed up. Why? Well, there's security in being intentional. And whether that is what you're going to teach them or what you're going to teach your volunteers, how you want your volunteers to look, be intentional about how you're going to train them that way, your students, how they're going to look and react in public. If you go back and listen to one of our episodes where Don Holmes, my travel agent for more than 20 years, and I'm still going to be using Don with High Point Travel, and he talked about people hated to see churches coming to those ski slopes because they would drive, they would take off in Texas somewhere where Don is from, and Waco, and get up to Colorado at Steamboat Springs or somewhere like that, Vail, Keystone, one of my favorites out there at Sunlight Mountain and Glenwood Springs. And they would hate the fact that these guys were coming in because they were grumpy, they were mean, they were anything but showing the type of person that they intended for people to see who they were. And not only that, the youth pastors as well as the volunteers were just as bad as the students, which is absolutely a horrible example. And he would say, make sure that you are as nice at those slopes when you show up as you were when you left Waco, Texas, or in our case, when you leave Orlando or Lake County, Eustis. And so make sure that you're intentional about how those things are going to happen on the trips. I had this trip to D.C. planned, and every 3 years is when this particular convention happened, and over 20,000 students. In fact, ended up being DCLA because it was so big that they started moving. 15,000 of them would be on the East Coast, so it would be 35,000 students total. We go up to Washington, D.C. each year, or every 3 years. One time I forgot to get an itinerary out to the parents. And so we're getting ready that morning to load the buses, and I have one parent irate and letting the whole crowd know it by telling me in front of the whole crowd that I did not have my act together, didn't have my organization together. They didn't have an itinerary. How do they know their kid's going to be safe? Now, listen, I had done this for a couple of decades, probably 20 years in that area already. But you know what? I needed an itinerary. I wasn't thinking intentionally on not only how are we going to take off and are we going to have a lot of fun, or the students going to be safe, or the staff going to be safe, but I should have been thinking intentionally of how am I going to leave the parents behind and what state of mind will they be in before we leave. And I left that set of parents, and that parent in particularly, in a bad state of mind because I wasn't intentional about thinking ahead about not only how are we going to act and react, but how are we going to leave people behind feeling about the trip that we're going on. And while we're gone, am I leaving them in worry, which means they're going to be agitated when I get back, which means I'm going to get more phone calls, or am I going to leave them secure that they have an itinerary in hand, knowing where we're going to be, when we're going to be there, and phone numbers in order for them to call? So be intentional, friends. Be intentional, youth workers, teachers, coaches, because intentional people get the job done, and people love to follow them. That's it, Youth Worker Nation. Have a great day.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.